Yo, I heard from you in a minute. Yeah, I do. What's going on, though? You come on, we family for life. Send me the details, and I'll be there. I'm on my way.
Now we know Force is coming to an end, but what's coming after? That's the big question, and it is something we are going to be digging into in this breakdown. But from my own personal point of view, and the question that I'm also asking on top of that is, could the next chapter also be the final chapter for Tommy Egan's character? I know they talk about how power never ends, and Michael Rennie Jr. has also said something very similar, but at some point in a couple of years' time, it might actually be time to say goodbye to one of Power's all-time greats. However, what actually sparked me into thinking about the end of Tommy Egan's character was something that Gary Lennon actually teased towards the end of Force Season 2 in an interview that he did with a Variety, and this is what he said. When it comes to the rest of Tommy's story, Lennon says he knows how the dealer stories end, and is currently in talks with Starz about how they can make that happen, starting with the third season renewal, but the only tease that he's giving is the phrase, never say never. Now from a writer's point of view, I do think it's quite normal to have an endgame in mind for a certain character, because then you can make the story in between make more sense. You know how the character's journey will end, so then you can start asking yourself the question, okay, how are we going to get him there? How do we justify his endgame and give him the right and appropriate ending? So that I do think is quite normal. But for Tommy, will it be death, jail, or something we don't often see in the world of Power, something which I think is very unlikely when it comes to Tommy Egan, a happy ending? So in this breakdown, we are going to be running through the end of Force and how that will have an impact on the next chapter, a potential crossover with Tariq St. Patrick, and then we're going to come back around to the final chapter for Tommy Egan, what it could actually look like with characters like Elisa Marie Proctor returning, so stick with this video right through to the very end. But up first, the key storylines that they do need to close off first in Power Book 4 Force Season 3. Now the next chapter of Tommy's journey after Force does depend a lot on what actually happens towards the end of Force Season 3, so I do think it is important we take a look at all these different storylines. For example, how did they end Tommy's storyline with all of these characters? Will he be run out of Chicago? Will he have to leave Chicago because of law enforcement? Or is it because the drug game is dead and he's in essence facing a losing battle, maybe even forced out of the CBI? Will he lose control over the CBI due to a potential conflict with Diamond and Jannard? Because Gary Lennon has teased for Season 3, one of the key themes is going to be how blood is thicker than water. So what actually happens with Jannard, Diamond and the CBI? Will Tommy be forced out of his position? There's also the storyline around Shanti. We know she's cooking in the background, manipulating the situation around Tommy, trying to gain his trust, and also looking to take the CBI with Jannard. With that one, my early prediction actually is Jannard will probably end up picking Diamond over Shanti. She's looking at Diamond and Tommy and thinking at this moment in time, let them set up the operation with the CBI under the Mexicans. Let's get in good with Tommy and Diamond, let's gain their trust, and when the time's right, they think they're going to kill them and take their operation. But my early prediction around that particular storyline is, I genuinely don't think Jannard will betray Diamond like he did before in Season 1. I think he's going to end up being the one who actually saves Diamond by killing Shanti. However, on the other hand, with Tommy, we all know about their beef and how it runs deep ever since Season 1. Add that onto the ongoing conflict between Tommy and Diamond. I genuinely wouldn't be surprised if there is a moment where he's forced out of the drug business where everybody turns on him. But how do they close off all these storylines, or do they leave some of these character arcs open-ended like they did with Power Book 2 Ghost, where they do kind of conclude it but at the same time they don't, which gives them an opportunity to bring them back a bit later on, kind of like Kane to Harder. At the end of Ghost Season 4, he had to go on the run, but it doesn't mean we ain't going to see him pop up in the world of Power again. Who knows, we actually might. So, if you're actually alive in the world of Power, there's always a chance you can pop back up. There's also the question around what happens with his family. There's JP, will he survive? His nephew D-Mac, Tommy's going to have to no doubt try and keep him on the straight and narrow, and avoid a very similar situation like his other nephew in Tariq. But is that also another losing battle because we know what D-Mac wants? Add that onto the fact he's also killed a family member of King Kilo. Teenagers sometimes think they know it all. Sasha Penn recently spoke about something very similar with what we're seeing with a younger Kanan in Raising Kanan Season 4. So, what happens with D-Mac right at the end of Season 3? Will he end up joining Tommy in his next chapter? I'm sure Tommy will want to take care of his family before he goes off, whether it's in California or wherever else, and that includes everyone from Maria, JP, D-Mac, and also Kate. Even though his relationship has been very up and down with Kate throughout the years, I'm sure he'll still want to kind of make sure everybody is looked after. There's also the issue with law enforcement with Stacey Marks. Earlier this week I said she's someone who's going to be very obsessed with trying to bring down Tommy Egan in Season 3. But in the grand scheme of things, I mean, let's be real, Are they really going to catch Tommy? I personally don't think so. Even if they do kind of get small wins here and there in season 3, even if Tommy is run out of Chicago by law enforcement, there is no way he actually gets caught. Not yet anyway. But a lot really does depend on how they actually end for season 3 when it comes to moving on to the next chapter. So at this moment in time, it really is difficult to say and even speculate. However, one of the storylines we can talk about in a bit more detail, one of the big storylines, in my personal opinion, is the war with Miguel Garcia and the Mexicans. This war with Miguel Garcia may get to a point where Tommy really is up against it in Chicago, and where the chain reaction then leads to this particular call Tariq got at the end of Ghost Season 4. Now, I do actually think it's going to be an absolutely crazy ending to Force. I do think it's going to be one of the craziest finales to a power show that we've seen in a very long time, with so many twists and turns, action, and even the potential crossover with Tariq. And the good thing about this is, Gary Lennon and Joseph Sikora knew that this would actually be the final season when they were actually mapping out season 3. While they were writing, they felt as if it was the right time to close this particular chapter of Tommy's journey. That means they could write and give us the right ending to this particular chapter for a lot of these characters, not just Tommy Egan. But more importantly, it also allows them to set up what comes after, and I do think that this could potentially tie into the phone call Tariq got at the end of Ghost. And there are a couple of reasons from a storyline perspective and a financial business standpoint why it just makes logical sense. From a storyline perspective, has the situation got really bad in Chicago where the war with Miguel Garcia is completely out of control? Has Tommy lost the backing of CBI, Diamond, and Jannard, just like we spoke about before, and is that why he's had to call Tariq? I mean, a lot of people were questioning towards the end of Ghost Season 4, out of all people, why on earth would Tommy call Tariq? Why would Tommy ever call Tariq for help? The thing we do have to remember is, who does Tommy actually have in his corner that he can really trust and count on? Especially if in Season 3 everybody in Chicago has betrayed him. We know they've squashed the beef that they had before, and Tariq also mentioned to whoever was on the other end of this phone call that they are family for life. And who does Tariq actually consider family? It's definitely not any of the Tejadas, certainly not Effie. He probably considers Brayden a brother, but even then, why do they need to keep that a secret if it was Brayden? The fact that he said family for life, in my opinion, it only points the finger in one direction, and that's Tommy Egan, because the situation in Chicago has probably become very hostile. Although Tommy's no stranger to hostile situations, we have to remember again, he really doesn't have many people that he can actually rely on in Chicago. I mean, there is Diamond, I guess, but again, we touched on the topic before. What if Diamond's turned? What if their conflict has kind of spilled over? He does also have family in Chicago with JP and DMAC, but again, he doesn't want them anywhere near the game because of what happened with the St. Patrick's back in power in New York. He also lost Liliana in Season 1, that definitely hurt. She would have definitely been a trusted sidekick for a very long time if she did survive, but she's also gone. So when you're actually looking at Tommy in Chicago, you're kind of actually running out of people who Tommy can actually rely on and actually trust, which is why he might have had no choice but to turn to Tariq, who's now more established in New York. He may actually have the soldiers and the resources to back him. The post-credit scene in Ghost Season 4 from a timeline perspective, I mean, we don't know when that was. How long has Tariq actually been established for in New York? I'm sure the news would have trickled over to Tommy where he would have got the word that Tariq is now the big dog in New York. So, if this war with Miguel Garcia, maybe the cartel, maybe Diamond, Jannard, and the CBI has taken center stage, it does actually make sense why Tommy is probably left with no choice but to call Tariq. Now, from a financial point of view, both Power Book 2 Ghost and Force have come to an end, with one season of Force still remaining, but it does make sense to maximize the views, the audience of Power Book 2 Ghost, and also bringing together two of the most popular characters in the world of Power, which then sets up the next Power show. So, coming to a few comments where those higher up at stars have mentioned cost cutting, shows getting expensive after the season 3 or 4 mark, I do think it makes logical sense. Jeffrey Hesh also mentioned they've already got one spin-off they're ready to announce, along with 2 more, and the one that I think they're probably waiting to announce, which is really exciting, I think is the merger of Tommy and Tariq. I mean, reading between the lines, at the end of the day, the bottom line is when it comes to making these shows, it has to be cost effective. Cancelling both Ghost and Force and merging them together, bringing Tariq and Tommy together, it just makes logical sense from a company's point of view and also what they've teased with Tariq's phone call and everything else. There's also a reason why we haven't got any further announcements, because they're probably waiting until the end of Force. I can guarantee the moment we get close to the end of Force Season 3, there's going to be a hell of a lot of news that drops soon after in terms of the next spin-off and the next phase of Power. We just have to be very patient, let the storylines and plots play out. But in terms of what the story could actually be for the next chapter, I've always actually thought Elisa Marie and the Italians will eventually pop back up.
Look, kid, I get it if you feel some type of way about me. But if you want to come and see me about it someday, I'll understand.
Now, at this particular moment in time, with all the moving chess pieces in Force at this moment, I genuinely don't see how they implement Elisa Marie or the Italians in Force. I mean, never say never, just like Gary Lennon, but I just can't see how when they have to close off all these character story arcs as well as set up the next chapter. Maybe at the end that's something they could potentially set up. For example, maybe Tommy does actually deal with Miguel Garcia. Maybe Tommy doesn't need Tariq's help with the war with Miguel, the cartel, or with Diamond, Jannard and the CBI, or maybe even Shanti. Maybe Tommy's actually dealt with all that by himself. Maybe it is actually the return of the Italians and Elisa Marie towards the end, because we do have to remember, both Tommy and Tariq had a hand in killing Joe Proctor. We also know in the world of power, when you deal with one problem, another one pops up which is equally as bad, if not worse. So maybe that's actually something to keep in mind towards the back end of season 3. And I do say Elisa Marie and the Italians because Joseph Sikora has acknowledged this before on social media. He knows it himself to kind of complete Tommy's story arc. They have to come back around to this conversation they had with Elisa Marie back in Power 613. They definitely left a lot of breadcrumbs for a meeting between the two a bit later on. We also have to remember, probably been what, 6 years since this was probably filmed. We also watched Tariq grow from a boy to a man, and the actress who actually played Elisa Marie definitely won't be this little girl anymore, especially with Carlos Civello and the Italians behind her. She's someone who I think could be very dangerous and definitely one to keep an eye on. Now this actually brings me full circle to what Gary Lennon teased at the end of Force Season 2, and well and truly there's only 3 possible outcomes, one of which in my opinion is just simply impossible, which is a happy ending. I'm definitely ruling that one out completely for Tommy Egan. So it leaves us with the other 2, death or jail. And what do we think? Can you genuinely see Tommy being caught and going to prison for the rest of his life? Or will a storyline like Elisa Marie come full circle? Now Tommy actually strikes me as a character who's very similar to Kanan Stark in a way. He lives and dies by the streets. There were countless of examples back in Power. It was also said in Force Season 2 in conversation with Maria, where he said something very similar. He's gonna always find his way back to the streets. They were talking about them going to Barcelona, but Tommy isn't a person who's made to just sit on a beach. Early retirement and doing what Ghost dreamed of back in Season 1 of Power. This was just pure fantasy and kind of delusion from Ghost if he actually thought he could live this life in Miami.
We've been hustling together our whole lives. I love this shit.
So Tommy is someone who's very similar to Kanan. This is the only thing he's ever known. But just like Kanan, I can genuinely only see one outcome for him when it comes to the end of his story arc, and that's death. And I do think Elisa Marie and the Italians will probably have a hand. I do think we're going to come back around to this conversation in a couple of years' time and all the dots are going to begin to connect. So, whatever the next chapter is after Force, I personally still believe it will be Tariq, and I also now think it's going to be the last one for Tommy Egan. Not that I want it to be the last one, but you also have to ask the question, what more can you genuinely do with Tommy's character, where he's been there and done that back in New York? He's been there and done that with Chicago. We've seen what he's gained and what he's lost. He's probably going to lose even more in Season 3. He's probably going to go off to a new city, which may be California, who knows. We know he can't go back to New York because he's supposed to be dead in New York, but you genuinely have to ask the question, what more can they do? That's why I do think it's going to end up being his final one. This chapter could also be the one which gives Tariq all the tool he needs. Tommy kind of acting like the final mentor. Over the past couple of weeks, I have been speaking about a big chain that seems to be running across the Power universe. Raising Kanan and Book 2 Ghost or Force may not be connected as such, but when you look at the chain of events which starts right at the top with characters like Snaps, Pop and Breeze, everything is connected when you talk about what Tommy went through with Ghost, learning from Breeze and so on. Tommy can share all of his life experiences with Tariq. They have a lot in common with them losing unborn babies. Tommy can help Tariq understand Ghost a lot more, which may help Tariq understand why Ghost made some of the choices he made when he was a child and also some of the choices he made back in Power. Tommy can tell Tariq all these stories from his perspective, because as we've been speaking over the past few weeks, perception is everything in Power. I mean, who better to tell him, guide him, and act as a final mentor than the one person who not only grew up with Ghost, but also Kanan and Breeze. But in the grand scheme of things, Gary Lennon does know how he's going to end Tommy's story arc, and I do personally think it's going to be in the next chapter that comes after Force, so definitely just some food for thought. Will it be death or jail? or maybe a happy ending, which is highly unlikely. Personally, I would love to see Tommy around for however many years they can, but at the same time, every character does have a shelf life, and the same goes for Tommy Egan. But the floor is now yours. Let me know your thoughts down below in the comment section. Let me know what you think Gary Lennon has in mind when it comes to the end. Drop all your thoughts down below in the comment section, and as always, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.